The Watcher's Tale, Part 9, The Final Battle. The full moon rose high in the night sky, casting its white light over the trees and land of Elohim's and Atheria's property. The night was quiet. Not a sound of any natural creature could be heard. It was as if nature itself knew that something was about to happen. A small breeze softly swept through the property, causing the chimes on the porch to chime. Dark shadows started to form in multiple numbers, lining up as if in formation. In dark purple wisps, the shadows took the shape of soldiers, not of this present time and era. Row upon row transformed, all facing the back porch, which was 10 acres away. The beings moaned and breathed in raspy breaths. They were hungry for war, for blood, for destruction. In the center of the soldiers, a large shadow appeared, and in a flash of green flames, Matthias rose. Come out, wherever you are," he said. Moaning, Liz turned on her side, pain shot through her body. The last thing she could remember was flying towards Atheria and Sabrina. Then everything went dark. Liz sat up and rubbed her head. Her head was pounding. Flash! Images of war filled her mind. She saw her father, Elohim, in his dark form. Fire raged around him, his large black wings fanning the flames. She also saw Matthias, who looked more wolf-like. The two brothers were in a heated battle. Another scene flashed in her mind. Elohim was laying in Atheria's arms, her tears mixing with the blood on his face. Flash! Liz gasped for breath. Her head felt even worse. Liz tried to stand up, but fell to the ground. Again, she tried to stand up. This time, she stood on two shaking legs. Spreading out her arms for her balance, she took a very uneven step. Taking another step, her strength returned to her body. Flames danced in her eyes. She looked up, and in one jump, transformed into her phoenix form, and flew off. Matthias paced back and forth, waiting. "Where are you, brother?" One of his soldiers, a tall and scarred, evil-looking man, came up to Matthias. "My lord, perhaps the Watcher is a coward and will not show," he said in a raspy tone. Matthias rolled his eyes, and with a twist of his wrist, the man screamed in pain. "He'll show." The man cowered back in formation. Maybe Elohim wasn't going to show after all. If there's one thing Matthias knew about his brother, he was annoyingly punctual. Suddenly, Matthias doubled over in pain. He gasped for breath. He stood up slowly, his eyes closed. Matthias searched the area, but could not sense his brother. He reached out with his mind. Maybe it was Atheria, yet he could not feel her. In fact, he sensed nothing. It was as if someone or something had cut his forced connection with her. "Clever," Matthias spat. Then, as if on cue, hundreds of flames appeared in front of the house. Once the flames dissipated, wraith-like horsemen appeared. Their black cloaks swayed in the breeze. The near-skeletal horses beat the ground with their hooves. Matthias watched as the dark riders sat motionless upon their horses. "So, I see my brother has been busy." In front of the riders, the dirt ground started to shake. Matthias felt the earth tremble. So did his soldiers. Then a massive tornado of fire fell from the night sky and hit the ground hard. Out of the funnel, a small tendril-like flame shot out and moved toward the porch of the house. The flame vanished, and in its place, Jacob ran into the house. Jacob slammed the door behind him and ran to the large picture window that looked out over the back of the house. Elohim had commanded him not to be outside during the battle, that he would be protected in the house. While Jacob was watching out the window, he didn't notice that all around the house, magic runes started appearing on every surface. The symbols glowed, a faint blue glow, which then engulfed the house like a dome. The giant pillar of fire exploded in a wall of fire and spread toward Matthias and his dark soldiers. Matthias lifted his hands and brought them down. Flashes of lightning struck the ground, throwing up mounds of dirt. He pushed his hands forward and with invisible force pushed a choking cloud of dirt toward the wall of fire. The two elements crashed in each other, causing a shockwave that tore trees out from the ground, one tree crashing into the crafting shack, destroying it. Eloheim spread his wings. Then one of the Hell Riders behind him blew a war horn. Its ominous din filled the air. Each Hell Rider drew their sword and launched their attack. Both sides moved toward each other in earnest. As they were about to come face to face, small flames darted between the Hell Riders. In their place, Hellhounds bounded forward and leapt into Matthias's armies, ripping and tearing flesh from bone. Then the two small armies met in a thunderous crash. Hell Riders' blades cut down the hordes of beings. As beings fell, Matthias was busy sending lightning through a group of Hellhounds that were nipping at his heels. The hounds evaporated in horrid yelps, whimpers, and then ash. Sending another bolt toward a Hell Rider, Matthias spotted Eloheim in the distance, cutting down a few soldiers with his sword and axe. The Dark Watcher drove his sword into the chest of one and removed the head of another in a single motion with his axe, spraying blood all over the Watcher. Blood and mud mixed, leaving the ground a mess of flesh and humanity. Jacob watched as soldiers and demons continued their macabre dance with steel and shield. Hellhounds feasted on the dead, while the sky lit up with lightning and fire. Jacob could see that once beautiful landscape of trees and rolling hills of their land now lay in ash and blood. Jacob reached to his side and palmed the handle of his gun that Eloheim gave him. He had never fired one before, but Eloheim's instructions were simple. Aim at the largest part of the body and pull the trigger. Let physics do the rest. Jacob trusted his friend, since he saw his and Atheria's massive arsenal in the custom-built basement they had built when they built their house. Suddenly, a body hit the window, breaking Jacob's thoughts. Jacob braced himself for shattering glass, but a blue ruin-laden shield formed and bounced the lifeless body away from the house and into throngs of the fighting people. Before Jacob could catch his breath, the front door of the house swung open. Jacob spun around, drew his gun, and fired. The bullet flew, but was deflected by Atheria's axe. With shaking hands, Jacob was both horrified and relieved when he saw Atheria. Her appearance had changed, her power radiating everywhere, but his heart warmed with the knowledge that he was not in danger from her. Quickly behind her, Sabrina and Jen, Eloheim's sister, came inside. "You three, stay here," Atheria commanded, and then darted out the door. All three moved to the window. Jen was visibly shaken by the scene that was unfolding, while Sabrina moved to a different window, not to see her mother fighting, which was now with her armies and joining the dance. No, Sabrina was looking for Eloheim. In the center of the fighting, Eloheim and Matthias circled each other. "So now it comes to it, dear brother," Matthias said, with an air of anticipation in his voice. "Indeed it does." That's all he said. Then Eloheim spread his wings and quickly folded them, as a gust of wind and razor-sharp feathers raced towards Matthias, who lifted his arms and formed a shield of lightning, blocking the brunt of the attack, but his force caused Matthias to slide back a few feet. "It's sad, really. You broke your word to Atheria and embraced your true nature after all. For what?" he said while shooting a bolt of lightning toward Eloheim. Eloheim's wings deflected it, sending the bolt exploding to the ground, sending dirt and debris into the air. Matthias sent another bolt toward Eloheim. "To break her favor? To lose it all?" Matthias spat again. Eloheim roared, his eyes blazing with flames. He launched towards Matthias, lifting his cackling brother high into the air. Holding him by his shirt, he spoke. "If my sacrifice frees them from you, then I will gladly bear that burden." With those words, he dropped Matthias and watched him fall to the earth. As he watched his brother fall, Eloheim spotted Atheria in the throngs of battle. "Atheria," he said in a whisper. Distracted, Eloheim did not notice a large ray of light emanate from under him. The beam caught Eloheim in the back, burning his wings. Like a heavy stone, he fell, his wings turning to smoke and ash. As he landed, the impact sent a massive shockwave through the area. Hellriders and Matthews' soldiers alike were incinerated. Along with howling hellhounds, no one, except Atheria and Michael, who was fighting by her side, were spared from the wave of energy. The windows of a house even shattered, breaking the runic wards that protected the family. Jacob, Sabrina, and Jen were all pushed back by some force other than shockwaves. Sabrina opened her eyes to see all the glass shards froze in the air and then fall to the ground. Outside, Atheria lay still on the ground, her body covered in blood, but not her own. A shield of fire covered her and Michael. Liz hovered over the house. She had arrived just in time to protect those she could from the shockwave. She spotted Matthias walking over to Elohim's body. With the weapon in his hand, she began to chant an incantation and aimed it at him, but her power failed her. "What?" she said out loud. "This, my child of fire, is his battle. He chose this path, and he must see it through," said Mother Moon. Liz cursed under her breath. Elohim laid almost lifeless in a crater of mud and blood. His wings now burnt strands of what they used to be. Matthias walked over to the smoking ruin that was his brother. He knelt down and whispered into his ear, "Look at what you've become. How much you have given up just to keep hold of a dream," Matthias said with an evil grin. Matthias continued, "Look at your land, destroyed and ruined, burnt with your selfish love. And you," Matthias shouted and kicked Elohim in the face, "broke your vow to your soul flame. You embraced your true form. For what? Nothing." With those words, Matthias lifted an axe and went to bury it in Elohim's head. When the axe stopped, Elohim held on the axe firmly. Both brothers struggled for its control. Matthias' expression turned sour. He did not expect his brother to have much fight left in him, if at all. Both brothers called upon their element, and in an explosion of fire and lightning, both brothers flew into the air, landing separately from each other, each hitting the earth hard. The shockwave from the brothers' attack engulfed the shield that was protecting Atheria and Michael. The vibration stirred Atheria awake. Quickly, she bounded up, axe and sword in hand, ready to attack. In seconds, she realized no one was there to attack her. She looked around and saw the devastation of the land. Her heart sank when she looked at the burning trees, illuminating the dead bodies and horses scattered across the land. Then she saw them. Elohim, her love, a man she had physically not seen in almost a year, was a mere shadow of himself, his dark wings now nearly removed from his body. She can see him on one knee, his head bent low as if in prayer. She reached out to feel him, and though she did not feel him as she once did, Atheria could feel him, at least a part of him. She could tell how weak he was, his once enormous energy, now barely a flicker. He was dying. Tears formed and slowly ran down her face. Atheria looked past Elohim and could also see Matthias laying on the ground, still breathing. "Bastard," she said. That man, the shadow that had been haunting their entire existence and even haunting her for her mortal life, still lived. Anger burned inside her heart and soul. She hit the shield with her axe hard, but it did nothing. She screamed in anger and desperation. Elohim could barely keep his eyes open. His body screamed for eternal rest. He had stretched his powers to the limits. He knew that if he had embraced his darkness, that it would take a fatal blow to him. And they had. He could feel his energy fading. The once blazing flame he held inside him was only a flicker now. Images of 6,000 years of life with Atheria flashed through his mind. Tears, laughter, conversations, working the land, the birth of their many children. All the images and sounds faded, yet only Atheria's face remained. The flowered wreath on her head, her long hair weaved in braided strands. Her eyes and smile pierced his soul. It was her at their first ceremony, a memory Elohim always kept close to his heart. A single tear streaked down his blood-soaked face. He looked up and saw Hunan circling overhead with Munin. Shifting his gaze, he rested his eyes on the motionless body of his brother. Eloheim summoned the energy he had left. He needed to end this once and for all, even if it did mean the end of his long life. As long as his family was safe and free, his sacrifice would be worth it. With shaking legs, Eloheim stood to his feet. He gripped the handle of his axe and walked towards Matthias, keeping a careful eye on his brother. Eloheim walked closer, while memories of the past filled his mind. The smiles of his children and Atheria embracing him on his final journey. Eloheim reached Matthias's body. The body twitched, and Matthias turned his head, his face a torn remnant of what it used to be. Coughing blood, he spoke.
You lost everything and sacrificed it all.
Eloheim raised his axe. In one last bit of energy, he plunged it toward his brother's head. Yet before the edge of the axe made purchase, green flames flashed in Matthias's eyes.
Good, now die!
He jerked away as the axe narrowly missed, and a stone pillar erupted from the ground, and like a spear impaled Eloheim through his stomach, knocking him back, dead. There was a scream in the distance, and as he stood up, Matthias saw Atheria break free from her shield. The shield maiden's anger tore through the magic. An evil grin creased Matthias's face. It was over now, and the woman he had always wanted was now his. His grin, however, would not last long, for up above he heard the cry of a raven.
No,
he shouted. He raised a hand toward that raven and was about to call down lightning when suddenly he lurched forward, his concentration broken. Matthias felt a sting of pain in his back and could feel warm liquid running down his back as well. He tried to reach for where the pain was and then felt the handle of an axe. Atheria came around again, this time in plain view of the man who killed her love. She moved quickly and with deadly precision, danced towards Matthias. He picked up Eloheim's axe and tried to block her blows, but each landed heavier and heavier. He saw the pure rage in her eyes. Anger contorted her face. Blow after blow of her axe drove Matthias back further, his heels trying to dig in the ground for purchase.
I gave you everything,
he shouted. She made another move, spinning around him, digging the blade of her axe deep into the back of his knee.
I want nothing from you,
she spat. Matthias fell to the ground. His breath labored.
You are mine,
he said in a hoarse voice. Atheria walked over to him. Without saying a word, she noticed a spear stuck in the ground. She removed it.
I was never yours. You do not own me or my children.
She raised the broken spear and drove it into the back of his head.
You are not worthy of me.
She spat and drove the spear deeper until it was firmly cut into the ground. She bent and whispered in his ear,
But he is.
Atheria ran over to Eloheim's body. She fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. She touched his body with shaking hands. He was cold to the touch. Lifting his large frame into her arms, she rested him on her lap. Rocking back and forth, Atheria sobbed uncontrollably. The pain of being separated and disconnected was one thing, but now to lose the man she had loved for so long, to lose everything, was unbearable. She lifted his cold hand and placed it on her cheek, to provide some sort of comfort, but the cold touch denied her a feeling she had loved so much and longed for. Her head fell on his. She nestled her face against his.
I love you. Please don't go. I need you.
She whispered this to him several times. Time passed, and night continued. Atheria continued to hold Eloheim, refusing to let him go. Finally, sleep came to the grieving woman. She was left with no dreams, no comfort of rest, just silence, as if the universe itself was unable to offer any words of comfort. Overhead, the raven circled, watching. Clouds rolled in as the darkness of night began to give way to the approach of the new morning dawn. A single drop of rain fell from the sky and dropped down on Atheria's forehead. It slowly streamed down her nose and onto her lips. The chilly sensation stirred Atheria. She opened her eyes, praying the death of her love was nothing more than a nightmare. Sadly, as she looked down upon Elohim's lifeless face, her heart broke even more. Then, the sound of a footstep broke her concentration. It came from behind. She quickly turned her head in the direction. At first, she feared it was Matthias, somehow still alive. Instead, she fixed her gaze on a tall woman whose moon-pale skin glowed. The twilight hair seemed to shimmer as she walked.
Luneth.
The moon goddess continued to walk towards her. Atheria could see her face was stained from tears.
A brother's hatred and jealousy has destroyed my first son,
she said in a broken voice. She knelt down beside Atheria and placed a hand on Elohim. As they were doing this, Sabrina and Jen ran from the house towards the direction. Sabrina fell to the ground, holding her mom and Elohim, tears, crying uncontrollably. Jen as well, also in the same form. Luneth spoke again.
My son gave up his very soul to protect you and your family. There is no greater sacrifice.
Atheria looked up with stained eyes.
Mother Moon,
The words almost refused to come out of her mouth.
He is gone.
The finality in those words spoke more than their meaning. Luneth closed her eyes and wept, then spoke.
My daughter, flame of my son, what would you give to bring him back?
Before Atheria could answer, Luneth looked at everyone else.
Everyone back, please,
she said in a calm voice. Sabrina could see Elohim's body. Sabrina, Jen, Jacob, all withdrew and stood back, Sabrina being held closely by Jen. Luneth looked at Atheria.
Again, daughter, what would you give? Everything, mother,
Atheria said. With those words, Luneth produced a crystal dagger from her gown and spoke.
What was once one flame, but split in two, what two become one again? May the Great Spirit find grace and mercy.
Atheria reached out her hand toward the ancient. Luneth took the blade and cut the palm of Atheria's hand. Blood began to pool, its red color almost shimmering in the early morning light. Luneth closed the hand and lifted over Elohim's open mouth. As the blood formed a droplet, it fell and then burst into flame. Every drop, as if Atheria were slowly pouring out fire, fell into Elohim's lips and into his mouth. The spectators watched, unsure of what was happening. Jen, still holding Sabrina, looked in awe.
That is enough, Atheria.
She pushed back Atheria's hand. Atheria watched to see if anything would happen, but nothing. Her heart sank even further. Then a strong wind blew in. Everyone, except Luneth, moved to brace themselves from it. On the horizon, the sun finally crested, its golden rays shattering the darkness. Atheria watched as the sun continued to rise, its beauty a striking conflict with the scene around them. For a moment, she thought she could feel a warm sensation on her face. Thinking it was only the sun's morning heat, she thought nothing of it until she heard his voice.
Atheria.
She turned her head slowly and realized that warm feeling was not the sun, but the palm of Elohim's hand resting upon her cheek. Tears of happiness and disbelief fell from her eyes. She placed both hands on his face and kissed his lips. Elohim took her into his arms, holding her tightly.
I love you, my heart and my soul, he whispered. I love you, my soul and my heart. The end.